Hello there. Tonight, we travel to the Qing Dynasty. Long sleeves brushing cobblestone streets, oil lamps flickering in doorways, the distant hum of a bamboo flute floating through the mist. You've wandered into a rural Chinese village where something odd is happening. There's red silk draped from tree branches, a wedding procession forming, and tables set with food, but there's no sign of a bride, or groom for that matter. You get closer past the curious chickens and sleepy dogs and notice something stranger still: paper effigies, human-shaped, carefully folded, painted with wide eyes and blushing cheeks. The bride is here after all, but she's made of stiff, creased parchment. And yes, she's very much dead. Ghost marriages, or Minghun, were a real and surprisingly common part of life and afterlife in Qing-era China. Weddings weren't just for the living. They could bind the spirits of the dead, settle unresolved family obligations, or even secure a childless son, an afterlife companion. You probably wouldn't survive long in this world of spirit negotiations and posthumous matchmaking unless you brought a really convincing medium and some paper money to burn. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing who's drifting off with us across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the wedding procession quietly, not wanting to spook any relatives or ghosts. The air is thick with incense and whispering. The family members look solemn but not sad. This isn't a funeral, it's a celebration, one you're not entirely sure how to behave at. The first thing you notice is the red thread. It's tied from a lantern post to the doorway, and a rooster is being coaxed to cross it, an ancient symbolic act to invite spirits to pass through the veil. You wonder briefly what happens if the rooster refuses. Maybe they try a duck instead. The ritual has all the hallmarks of a traditional Chinese wedding: gifts exchanged, formal bows, ancestral altars dusted and adorned. But everything is slightly off. No one is getting rice drunk, no musicians are playing the erhu. And when the bride is carried in, folded neatly in a box, the air grows heavy. No one jokes about cold feet tonight. The Qing Dynasty, which ruled from 1644 to 1912, was a time of rigid social order, deep-rooted Confucian values, and ancestor reverence that bordered on obsession. Every person had a role, and even in death that role continued. Unmarried sons, problematic. Deceased daughters, still expected to marry in some cases. It wasn't just a question of closure, it was about cosmic balance. Spirits without spouses were considered restless, their lineage incomplete. A fringe belief? Not really. Some regions, especially rural northern China, normalized the practice. And while the earliest examples go back even before the Han Dynasty, it's during Qing times that ghost marriages became ritualized and widespread. Entire manuals existed on how to do them correctly. You had to make sure the spirit's birth date was compatible with their posthumous match. You had to burn symbolic offerings, paper houses, miniature horses, even paper cellos if your ghost liked music. The afterlife apparently was a pretty happening place. And like all weddings, ghost marriages were full of logistics. Families negotiated dates, auspicious symbols, and yes, even bride prices. There were no refunds if your spirit bride turned out to be temperamental. In fact, one archived family record from Shaanxi province describes a father angrily demanding compensation when his son's ghost wife caused a poltergeist episode within 3 nights. The other family, according to legend, offered 3 pounds of smoked duck and a very elaborate apology letter. Historians still argue whether ghost marriages were primarily religious rituals, social fixes, or a mixture of both. Some see them as symbolic acts meant to complete family cycles. Others believe they were community pressure points, ways to manage grief gossip and inheritance loopholes. Either way, they happened often enough to be documented in court records, temple logs, and funeral notices. Even your feet feel a little unsure now, standing among the flickering shadows of spirit lanterns. You edge away from the ceremony, not wanting to get mistaken for an eligible soul. As you stroll back through the village's narrow streets, you spot a small shop selling red paper effigies, people horses, entire banquets. One model even looks like a karaoke machine. Qing Dynasty, but make it party ready. And here's the thing to the villagers, these weren't toys, they were vessels. Once burned, they'd travel to the spirit realm where the deceased could use them. Think of it like Amazon Prime for ghosts with better tracking and fewer delays. You overhear a grandmother haggling with the shopkeeper. She wants a paper sedan chair upgraded to a phoenix chariot. For her late husband, of course. He always liked to arrive in style, she says, and you just know he probably still does. You pass under a hanging scroll that reads, "The dead do not leave us. We marry them in red." And just like that, it all begins to make a strange sort of sleepy sense. You wake up figuratively speaking inside a room, thick with the smell of sandalwood and old ink. The wedding's done, the rooster's probably asleep somewhere, and now you're being shown something even more surreal, the marriage contract. Yes, a real one. Carefully brushed in black characters across rice paper, it includes names, birth dates, ancestral lineages, and the usual formalities. Except at least one, if not both of the names, belongs to someone already residing in the great beyond. In Qing Dynasty, ghost marriages paperwork still reigned supreme even over death. The formality makes sense if you think like a Qing bureaucrat. Every relationship must be recorded, every ritual standardized. You wouldn't want a rogue ghost wandering the afterlife unmarried and unaccounted for. Plus, a proper contract meant protection, legal and spiritual, for both families. Not that your local magistrate would be thrilled to see it. You peer at the delicate strokes of brushwork and someone whispers that this contract binds a deceased daughter to a young man who died last spring. Neither ever married in life, and their families feared their souls might grow bitter and restless. So in a show of ghostly diplomacy, the match was arranged. Contracts varied depending on region and social class. Wealthier families had them calligraphed and sealed with family stamps. Poorer families often managed with oral agreements and a ceremonial nod. Some included clauses for posthumous dowries, grain fabric, even land, transferred symbolically between the families. It's like estate planning but with bonus incense. You can't help but wonder how seriously they took all this. Turns out, very. If the spirit marriage wasn't properly documented, it could lead to ancestral chaos. Imagine the horror of showing up at the underworld registry without proof of marital status. You'd be the ghost equivalent of someone whose airline ticket was in the system but never actually printed. Scholars debate the exact origins of ghost marriage contracts, but many agree they reflect Confucian values taken to their paper-scented extreme. Confucianism emphasized filial piety, hierarchy, and family continuity. Marriage wasn't just personal, it was a moral and cosmic duty. A dead child without a spouse, that was a crack in the ancestral wall. And the Qing bureaucracy loved walls. But let's not pretend these documents were purely sacred. Some were forged, others were reused. In one infamous case, a marriage contract was altered after the ceremony to swap out the groom's name. A scandal erupted not because someone had committed fraud, but because the ghost bride might now be confused, insulted, or just plain angry. The idea of ghosts holding grudges may sound amusing from the comfort of your modern IKEA-furnished bedroom, but in Qing China, spirits were no laughing matter. People slept with knives under pillows or hung mirrors above their doors to deflect ghost visits, marrying them off. That was just smart planning. Smart. One fringe belief claimed that unmarried spirits could drag living relatives into dreams and beg for a match. Some accounts say the dreams were vivid enough to leave people physically exhausted. Dream harassment, you muse, imagining a ghost turning up in your sleep with a wedding invitation and a nagging mother-in-law in tow. The contracts weren't just private family affairs either. In some towns, the community got involved. Local elders, religious leaders, or matchmakers would oversee the signing, sometimes even at a public altar. After all, this wasn't just about two souls. It was about keeping the spiritual harmony of the entire village intact. You sit back on a low wooden stool trying to imagine modern equivalents. Paperwork for ghosts. Maybe that's what customer service calls are. A woman nearby folds up a copy of the contract and gently slips it into a small lacquered box which will be buried with the deceased or burned during the ceremony. This, she says, ensures delivery. And here's the twist, not all ghost marriages were between two dead people. Occasionally, a living person would marry a ghost. Usually it was a woman often pressured by her family or seeking to elevate her social status posthumously. In these cases, the paperwork got even weirder. A clause might state that the bride must remain chaste for life. Another might designate the in-laws as her new legal guardians. You picture some poor girl holding a marriage contract and thinking, well, it's not like I had plans anyway. Still, for many, the ritual brought peace. It fulfilled obligations. It gave closure. And sometimes it was simply what you did. When tradition and belief intertwine for generations, even the strangest customs start to feel like necessities. As the family packs up the ceremony site, they carefully roll the contract and tuck it into a red silk pouch. It will be buried alongside the ashes of the bride. A marriage certificate notarized by ritual, sealed by fire. It's late now and the village is falling asleep. Lanterns dim. Crickets take over the night shift. You walk through the winding alleys past closed doors and whispering trees, and you think about the lives people lived even after death, and about all the forms they filled out on the way. The next morning, or what passes for morning in this haze of drifting incense and soft rooster sounds, you find yourself face to face with someone entirely unexpected, the village matchmaker. She's tiny, perhaps 4 feet tall, if you don't count the elaborate bun pinned high on her head with jade hair sticks. Her name is Madame Lu, and she's been matchmaking since before your great-grandmother was born, both for the living and the dead. Dead people are less picky, she says with a grin that reveals exactly 3 teeth, but they're harder to reach. You sit beside her in a courtyard where moths flutter lazily and teacups rattle in the wind. She opens a scroll filled with names, some crossed out with red ink, others circled in hopeful black. It's a ledger of potential ghost spouses. This is where you learn that ghost marriages weren't random. Matchmakers played a crucial role, especially in larger villages. They consulted family histories, astrological signs, and sometimes even temple inscriptions to ensure compatibility. The same stars that determined wedding dates for the living could point to spirit unions. But Madame Liu doesn't work alone. She gestures toward a younger man leaning against the well. He's the village medium, his job contacting the dead, which he does through a combination of chanting trance states and, for some reason, straw wine. You get the feeling he enjoys that last part a little too much. The two of them, matchmaker and medium, form a kind of ghost marriage dream team. Families come to them desperate for peace status or just some good spiritual insurance. Some bring items owned by the deceased, a comb, a shoe, a lock of hair. Others bring dream stories of voices in the night or visions of loved ones pleading for companionship. Madame Liu takes it all seriously. If a girl dies before marriage, she says she wanders, she's stuck. No home, no altar, no offerings. In a Confucian society where family hierarchy meant everything to die, unanchored, was a fate worse than most. The medium begins preparing for a consultation. He lights candles, arranges coins for divination, and places a bowl of rice in the center. You're invited to watch, but warned not to interrupt. Spirits hate small talk, he mutters. The session begins. He breathes slowly, rhythmically, his voice slipping into that uncanny, sleepy chant that makes your scalp tingle. He tosses the coins, watches their pattern, and nods. She agrees, he whispers, eyelids fluttering. She wants red ribbons and jasmine, no chrysanthemums. Jasmine it is. Historians still debate the legitimacy of mediums during the Qing Dynasty. Some claim they were respected conduits of spiritual communication. Others argue they were performers, half charlatan, half community psychologist. Either way, people believed, or at least they wanted to. And belief, you realize, is often more powerful than fact. You watch as the medium scribbles something on a piece of bamboo, perhaps the spirit's answer, or maybe a shopping list, and hands it off to Madame Liu, who nods approvingly. Beyond the spiritual work, matchmakers like Madame Liu also handled logistics. They arranged the burning of bridal trousseaux, the crafting of paper effigies, even the timing of ceremonies to align with lucky days. They ensured both sides followed custom, and occasionally acted as referees when arguments broke out about dowries or ghost etiquette. Oh yes, ghost etiquette. There were rules. Spirits had to be properly introduced. No sudden ceremonies, no surprise marriages, and always include food offerings. A hungry ghost is not a happy ghost. Some fringe stories tell of matchmakers who overstepped marrying off unwilling spirits or using fake mediums to arrange profitable unions. In one Qing-era folktale, a matchmaker's house is haunted by a furious paper bride who keeps rearranging her furniture. She wanted a west-facing bedroom, the tale ends ominously. But more often the matchmaker was a community figure part, spiritual advisor part, therapist part, gossip collector. You start to see Madame Liu that way. She knows everyone's family secrets, everyone's afterlife drama. You follow her as she walks to a small temple at the edge of town, where red strings hang from branches and faded marriage petitions flutter like prayer flags. Here, couples both living and ghostly come to pray for good matches. Some strings are fresh and bright, others are fraying with age. She ties a new ribbon onto the branch, murmuring a name. You catch only a whisper. He never got to see spring. It's a strangely tender moment. Before leaving, she pats your arm. You'll make a good spirit one day, she says with a wink. You smile nervously. Later that evening, you sit alone with the glow of fireflies and the echo of chants still circling in your ears. You think of the strange team that brings the dead together, the matchmaker with her ledgers, the medium with his ghosts, and the belief that even in death, love, or at least duty, must be fulfilled. It's just before dawn when you're gently nudged awake by the aroma of boiling rice and old pine smoke. The village is already moving quietly, reverently, as if the wind has whispered to everyone today's the day. A ghost bride is about to be welcomed into her in-laws' home. You shuffle toward the courtyard where preparations are in full swing. A cluster of women are laying out trays of symbolic gifts, red silk, dried fruits and coins wrapped in lotus leaves. Children scurry between rooms with bowls of water and sprigs of plum blossom. There's an energy in the air that feels more like anticipation than grief. This is a wedding after all, but not just any wedding. It's one where the bride is already deceased and the groom has been gone for 2 years. The ceremony today isn't for them exactly. It's for their families, it's for the community, and most curiously, it's for the in-laws. See, in Qing Dynasty China, a daughter-in-law held an essential role, not just as a wife, but as a bearer of continuity, a domestic engine of tradition, even if she was dead. In a culture defined by Confucian hierarchy, the family unit didn't end with death. Ancestors needed caretakers, incense didn't burn itself, and altars, as it turned out, looked rather lonely without the proper ranks of relatives enshrined above them. An unmarried son in the afterlife meant a severed branch in the family tree. Worse still, it meant no one to help him transition into the spirit world with the dignity and hierarchy he deserved. So ghost marriages helped patch the gaps. A posthumous daughter-in-law could still be brought into the family's ancestral line. She could be mourned and worshipped during annual rites. She could bring her own spirit lineage into the mix, enhancing the family's spiritual standing. You don't just marry into a family in Qing China, you extend its legacy across realms. And yes, she could technically become an in-law's full responsibility, which you imagine made family dinners, if ghosts had them, an interesting ordeal. One woman explains as she ties a red sash to the doorway. If my son doesn't marry, where will his altar go, alone like a guest? She shakes her head, as if even the thought is offensive. He must have a wife, even if only her name sits beside his. This is where things take an unexpectedly domestic turn. In some cases, the spirit bride was symbolically adopted into her husband's family. They would build her a paper figure, a symbolic body sometimes as detailed as to include her favorite hairstyle or a tiny embroidery pattern. That figure would be placed on the family altar or temporarily hosted in the home. Some even went as far as to assign a room red linens, incense sticks and all. What does a ghost do in that room, you wonder? Fold laundry, watch the breeze, lightly haunt. Historians still debate whether these actions were deeply felt religious obligations or simply social scripts performed out of duty. Some suggest families genuinely believed in the presence of the spirit daughter-in-law. Others argue it was more about appearances maintaining ritual propriety, so the neighbors wouldn't whisper, "Oh, poor Wang family, not even a ghost would marry their son." The idea of family duty extending into death is oddly touching and slightly terrifying. You imagine someone fussing over the spirit daughter-in-law's slippers because she might come in from the cold. One anecdote from the late Qing era even tells of a grandmother who insisted on setting out 2 extra bowls of rice each New Year's Eve, one for her late son and one for his paper bride. "She's not made of nothing," the old woman said. "She gets hungry too." You stand back as a procession begins. The bride, crafted entirely from paper but dressed with care in crimson robes, is lifted onto a small wooden palanquin. She's surrounded by offerings, cloth shoes, fake jewelry, a dowry chest containing paper currency, and a miniature comb set. The in-laws bow as the figure is carried into their home. There's no wailing, no theatrical grief, just calm reverence. A respectful welcome to someone who will never arrive by foot, but who is in her way very present. And it's not only about honoring the dead. Sometimes ghost marriages were also used to resolve disputes or protect living children. If a daughter died suddenly, her family might arrange a ghost marriage so she could be posthumously claimed by a new family, avoiding rumors, bad death taboos, or the dreaded possibility of her spirit becoming what they called a gaihun, or wandering soul. In one documented case, a father staged a ghost marriage for his daughter solely to avoid scandal over her death. He arranged it with a neighbor whose son had passed from tuberculosis. A modest paper ceremony was held, and both families walked away with peace of mind and no loose ends. You trail after the procession lost in thought. It strikes you that for all its strangeness, this practice served a profound emotional purpose. Where modern societies often dodge the subject of death, Qing China built rituals around it. They planned for it, negotiated with it, even got it to sign on the dotted line. As the bride reaches her new home, the in-laws bow once more. A brazier is lit. The paper figure is slowly burned, curling into ash, as the red dye smokes and vanishes. In that moment, her spirit is believed to cross the veil, officially welcomed. You feel something shift in the air like the last sigh of a breeze, and then it's done. By now, you're starting to get used to the idea that death doesn't mean an end to social obligations in Qing Dynasty China. But nothing quite prepares you for the peculiar sadness of the bachelor ghosts. You first hear about them over a bowl of sweet fermented rice soup, shared with an old storyteller under a willow tree. He wears a thick indigo robe, a hat too large for his head, and the kind of smile that always seems like it's hiding the punchline. They roam, he says, between slurps. Unmarried boys, they go whispering at windows. That's why your shoes are turned upside down before sleep. Keeps them away. You glance at your sandals. In the Qing worldview, dying unmarried didn't just make you lonely, it made you cosmically incomplete. In fact, some believed your spirit couldn't even cross properly into the afterlife without a marital bond, like being stuck at immigration with expired papers. And since women's status was often tied to their roles as wives and mothers, it was even worse for unmarried daughters. But for sons, it was a kind of quiet disgrace. Families feared their sons would become lone spirits, guhun, bitter, rootless, and worst of all, unvenerated. With no wife to perform ancestral rites or bear children who'd do the same, the line was broken. It wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a family emergency. That's why families of unmarried deceased men often went to great lengths to arrange ghost marriages, even if it meant finding a spirit bride from a different region or adopting a deceased girl whose background no one really knew. Better to have someone than no one. It was spiritual damage control. You walk through a narrow alley where red ribbons hang from doorways, markers of recent ghost weddings. A quiet plaque explains that this home has fulfilled its obligation. You imagine the son long gone being told across the spirit world that finally his name is safe. One odd practice involved the symbolic kidnapping of a paper bride. Families would craft the effigy and steal it from another household, sometimes with prior arrangement, sometimes not. The theft was staged, but the implications were serious. The groom's family could now claim the girl's spirit and thus integrate her into their ancestral line. An entire ceremony might hinge on this theatrical gesture. It gets stranger. Some families, unable to find a suitable match, would create entirely fictional brides or grooms' paper creations without a real counterpart. These imaginary partners still received full rights, and their existence was maintained through offerings and altars. You pause for a moment to imagine a ghostly couple made entirely of invention, kept together by faith incense and the occasional bowl of soup. And of course the economics come in. There was unsurprisingly a kind of matchmaking market, especially in places where bachelor ghosts were said to haunt the living. In some provinces, rumors swirled about bride brokers who sold paper effigies along with invented backstories. You wonder if any of them ever offered a money-back guarantee. Historians still argue whether these ghost marriages for bachelor spirits were driven more by belief or by social panic. Some scholars suggest that, like ancestor worship itself, they served to reinforce family structure and moral continuity. Others see them as a form of communal therapy, a way for the living to cope with untimely death and lost expectations. One fringe account, perhaps apocryphal, tells of a bachelor ghost so insistent that he showed up at his cousin's wedding feast and knocked a teacup off the altar. He was reminding us he needed one too, the bride's uncle explained. You picture the scene, turning to gasps and someone hissing, "Quick, find Madame Luce." Back in the village, you pass a wall of spirit tablets, each with names in gold characters. A small cluster has red ribbons tied beside them, signs that their owners were once bachelor ghosts, now safely married and properly honored. You notice one with two names, Liwei and Wife Unknown. Even that small act, inscribing the word wife, was enough to satisfy ritual demands. It's touching, really. In a time and place where lives were often short, death wasn't treated like an abrupt exit. It was an extended chapter 1 where community, family, and ceremony still had work to do. Before heading back, you linger at the edge of the ancestral hall. A boy, maybe 10 years old, lights a stick of incense and bows clumsily toward a small altar. His mother gently adjusts his posture. "That's your uncle," she says. "You never met him, but he has a wife now." And somehow that changes everything. You're sitting on a low wooden bench now, watching with sleepy fascination as the paper wife is assembled piece by piece. Her face is already formed gentle curves of folded parchment-inked eyebrows drawn in a graceful arch, lips touched with faint red pigment. She looks serene, or at least as serene as a flat, flammable object can look. What's more surprising than the figure itself is the attention to detail. Her robe is layered bright crimson over cream with hand-painted peony blossoms trailing along the hem. She has shoes, yes, paper ones, with upturned tips and even undergarments delicately pleated. You half expect her to blink. These paper effigies, or ji-ren, weren't just symbolic bodies. They were crafted with an unsettling amount of care, sometimes by specialists who spent their whole lives making things to be burned. Paper horses, paper, furniture paper, abacuses, even tiny fake cell phones in later eras, but the human forms remained the most intricate. You run a hand near, but not over a nearby figure. It's a paper husband this time, his robe stamped with gold ink. He's holding a fan because even ghosts, it seems, have summer weather to contend with. And then you see it, the tiny mole drawn on his cheek. Someone remembered. Someone wanted to remember. That's the difference between ritual and routine. During the Qing Dynasty, the art of paper effigy making was elevated to near religious craft. Entire workshops operated in bigger towns, with artisans specializing in everything from wigs for paper brides to intricate coin purses. A decent paper bride needed accessories, combs, bangles, sometimes a pet or two. One account from southern Fujian describes a ghost wedding featuring a full orchestra of paper musicians, with instruments, all burned, of course. You ask one elder how they know what to include. "She told me," he says simply, "in a dream." Some believed the dead communicated their wishes in sleep. Others relied on mediums or just good taste. A quiet superstition said that including the wrong accessory say giving a spirit a fan in winter could result in unpleasant hauntings. So people erred on the side of generosity. Historians still debate whether the level of detail in these effigies reflected true belief in an afterlife or simply a desire to honor the dead with extravagance. It's a blurry line. Is a perfectly folded paper hat a sign of love or just very good manners? And yet for something destined to be reduced to ash, each figure is stunningly expressive. There's a certain dignity to them. You start to see how these figures weren't just representations, they were invitations. To let the dead participate again, to bring them back into the rhythm of community, if only briefly. One craftsman, whom you find hunched beneath a lean-to, shaded with woven grass, lets you watch as he shapes a pair of hands. He uses thin bamboo slats for the bones, rice paper for the flesh. The hands are slightly open, not grasping, just resting, ready to receive. You don't know why, but that image stays with you. It turns out these effigies didn't always get burned. In some cases, especially when marrying a spirit to a living person, they might be placed at the altar for several days or even permanently enshrined in a back room. These ghost spouses were considered part of the family. A fringe tale tells of a young widow who kept her husband's paper effigy beside her bed for years. She'd light incense for it, brush its hair. Yes, it had real hair, stitched on, and murmur her day's gossip to it each evening. Eventually, her relatives removed it, concerned she was losing her grip. But she just smiled. "I never needed anyone else," she said. You're told not to stare too long into the faces of the paper people. There's an old belief that you might invite the spirit in. Let them look at you, someone says, not the other way around. So you avert your eyes as the bride is completed. She's placed gently onto a platform ringed with paper lotus petals and little origami cranes. A tiny red dot is painted between her brows. It's called the Huadiana mark of beauty, luck, and auspicious beginnings. It's strange watching something so carefully made prepare for such a fiery end. You step back as they ready the burn pile layered with joss paper and straw to catch the flame. The bride is set atop it all, sitting upright as if waiting for the ceremony to begin. And maybe it has. They light the edge with a smouldering stick of incense. The fire licks upwards, slow at first, then faster. The crimson sleeves curl in on themselves. The carefully crafted eyes disappear in the smoke. She goes gracefully without sound. No screams, no crumpling. Just a whisper of ash lifted into the morning wind. And in that moment you can't help but think she was never just paper. The sun has dipped behind the bamboo grove, and a silvery dusk spills across the rooftops like spilled rice wine. You're led now toward the edge of the village where a narrow path snakes past grave mounds and overgrown offerings. At the far end, a stone circle awaits half-covered in moss, centered around a brazier that still holds the faint scent of yesterday's fire. Tonight you've been invited to a ghost wedding, a real one. Or at least as real as it gets when both the bride and groom are no longer among the breathing. You're not alone. Family members dressed in muted versions of wedding red move like gentle shadows among tables filled with symbolic food, sweet glutinous cakes, steamed buns shaped like phoenixes, and small bowls of red dates. A string of tiny lanterns zigzags overhead, their flickering light making everything feel half dream, half theatre. You take a seat behind a low table, careful not to knock over the neatly arranged cups. Someone whispers that the guests are not only the living, they're here too, she says, pointing to the head table where two chairs sit empty, but unmistakably central. We just can't see them. A bowl of wine is poured, its vapor rising like an invitation. This kind of ceremony, a full graveyard ghost wedding, was rare even during the Qing Dynasty. But it wasn't unheard of, especially for families who had lost both children and hoped to unite them through ritual. Sometimes the dead had known each other in life, sometimes they hadn't. One Qing-era record speaks of a family who arranged a marriage between their daughter, struck by illness at 15, and a boy from the neighboring province who died in a fishing accident. They'd never met, but their birth charts aligned. And more importantly, both families needed closure. The ritual begins quietly. A Taoist priest steps forward, his robes soft with age, chanting in a gravelly rhythm. He doesn't shout. He doesn't command. Instead, his voice slides through the air like smoke, calling on spirits not to fear the fire, not to resist the bond. And then come the offerings. First, symbolic clothing, tiny paper robes folded with precision. Next, household items, a comb for the bride, a scroll for the groom, and a small chest filled with paper jewelry and coins. The symbolism is heavy but delicate, a life imagined, recreated, and now offered to the winds. You watch as two paper effigies are carried forth, one male, one female. They don't touch, they simply sit side by side facing the brazier with expressions of placid patience. It's like they've been waiting centuries for this night. One elder begins the bowing sequence, first to the heavens, then to the earth, then toward the two figures. It's the same order as in a living wedding. The ritual choreography hasn't changed. And then without fanfare, a fire is lit. You expect drama? Maybe a gong. Instead, it's quiet, reverent. The paper couple is consumed slowly, flame moving from foot to shoulder. The guests bow once more. Someone begins humming a lullaby. It's unclear whether it's for the bride or the groom. Maybe both. What's striking is how normal this feels. There's no fear, no shock, just the sense that something necessary is being completed, a chord tied, a chapter closed. Historians still argue whether these graveyard ghost marriages were expressions of lingering grief or creative solutions to societal expectations. Some claim they serve to calm the living more than honor the dead. Others point to regional traditions, especially in places like Shaanxi and Hebei, where the belief in ghosts as integrated family members remained strong well into the 20th century. One fringe story recounts a family who held a ghost wedding, not in a graveyard, but inside their home, complete with music, food, and hired actors to stand in for the spirits. The audience watched in silence as the groom's proxy lit incense and recited poetry. When asked why they didn't just skip the ceremony, the matriarch replied, "Would you cancel a wedding just because the bride couldn't walk in herself?" As the fire dims, the guests rise one by one. Some whisper parting words toward the ash. Others leave small offerings, pieces of candy, folded notes, a single plum. It's hard to say whether it's for the spirits or for themselves. You're handed a red paper packet, your suiqian they call it, spirit money, a token to keep bad luck at bay. Inside is a charm drawn in gold ink meant to bless and protect anyone who witnesses a ghost marriage. You don't argue. You slide it into your pocket like a passport you hope you never have to use. The night feels thick with something unspoken. Not fear exactly, more like acknowledgement. A recognition that not everything ends when we think it does, that maybe the dead keep appointments too. As you follow the trail back toward the village, the lanterns bob gently in the wind. Somewhere behind you, a bell rings once. Then silence. You wake to the sound of gentle crackling like silk being folded or someone walking across rice paper. It's early morning again and smoke curls lazily from the central courtyard. You're in time for the burning of the dowry. Today it's less about matchmaking and more about finances. A spirit marriage isn't complete without a proper dowry, yes, even for someone who's long dead. And as you're about to see, dowries in Qing Dynasty ghost weddings could be both wildly symbolic and sneakily expensive. Laid out before you are boxes, some real, some paper, all filled with gifts. There are bolts of imitation, silk, fake gold, bangles, perfume sachets, and what looks like a scroll titled 10,000 Years of Peace. The bride's family, even posthumously, is expected to contribute these items to support their daughter in her new life or afterlife. You watch as two women fold intricate banknotes, not modern-looking yuan, but sheets of hell money printed with ridiculous denominations like 50 billion. Some are shaped like ingots, others like silver sises. All will be burned in the ceremony so the deceased couple can access them in the underworld's version of capitalism. Apparently the dead need a lot of spending money. It's not just money, though. The dowry includes household items, paper mirrors, makeup, boxes, rice, cookers, umbrellas. One even includes a tiny paper servant, her face drawn with what seems to be concern. You can't help but whisper, "Sorry, girl," as they fold her neatly and tuck her into the basket. This is where you begin to understand the ghost dowry is less about wealth and more about ritual completeness. In life, dowries symbolized a woman's worth, the family's status, and her readiness for domestic duties. In death, they do the same, only with a bit more ash involved. And just like with living weddings, negotiations could get tense. Some families squabbled over what to include. Too little, and the groom's ancestors might feel insulted. Too much, and paper gold isn't free, and neither are the craftsmen. There's a fringe tale from a village in Anhui where two ghost wedding families actually went to court. The groom's side claimed the bride's family had faked the jewelry portion of the dowry, burning empty boxes labeled jade bracelets instead of actual paper bracelets. The court sided with the bride's family, stating that intentions weigh heavier than fireproof glue. Still, you see a level of detail here that borders on obsessive. Someone carefully paints tiny plum blossoms onto a paper chest of drawers. Another rolls up a miniature scroll containing a family recipe, symbolic perhaps of passing down womanly virtue to the next realm. Historians still argue whether these lavish dowries were sincere expressions of familial love or simply performances of social status. In some wealthier villages, ghost wedding dowries rival those of real weddings, creating local prestige for the living as much as comfort for the dead. But in poorer families, people got creative. One Qing-era record describes a bride's dowry that included hand-stitched scraps of red fabric and a wooden spoon dipped in ink to mimic silver. She doesn't need much, her mother had said, just something to hold on to. As the sun climbs higher, the brazier is readied. The items are placed in order, first the clothing, then the wealth, then the symbolic domestic goods. Finally, a red envelope containing the couple's shared fortune, folded in three. The matchmaker lights the first corner. Smoke rises, perfumed with sandalwood and ash. The flames move slowly, curling the fake jewelry, collapsing the paper mirror in a graceful fold. You stand far enough away not to inhale the glue, but close enough to feel the strange warmth of intention. Someone near you murmurs, "Now she'll have what she needs." It makes you think of all the things we carry in life and how much we try to carry into death. Status, memory, even a decent set of dishes. You walk around the brazier as the fire dies down. Ashes scatter soft as moth wings. Somewhere in the middle of the pile, the red dot from a paper shoe peeks out. It smolders, then vanishes. A small child drops in one last gift, a folded drawing of a dog. "For her to play with," he says solemnly. The priest nods and places a final lotus stick on the coals. And just like that, the dowry is sent. As you leave the courtyard, you notice something funny, a real coin tucked discreetly under a stone near the fire. Not paper, metal. Someone hedging their bets. Maybe, or maybe just a backup plan in case spirit ATMs have withdrawal limits. Either way, it's oddly comforting to know that even after death, someone out there wants you to be taken care of. You've heard of weddings that felt like funerals, but now you're about to witness the opposite, a funeral that turns into a wedding. At the edge of the village, a young woman named Yulin is preparing to be married. Her hair is combed and pinned in the traditional bridal bun, a red silk veil draped loosely over her face. Her dress is stunning, layers of brocade-embroidered phoenixes gliding across the sleeves like they're ready to take flight. There's just one thing, her groom is not among the living. You step into the cool stillness of the bridal chamber. It smells of camphor rice flour, and something older, maybe sandalwood, or maybe just the scent of 100 ceremonies before hers. Yulin sits calmly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She doesn't cry, she doesn't speak. She's marrying a ghost after all. This isn't just ritual, this is reality. In Qing China, it wasn't unheard of for living women to be married to deceased men, especially under particular family pressures. Sometimes the match was made to honor a prior engagement. Other times it was for inheritance purposes or to maintain family lineage. Whatever the reason, the marriage was legally binding and symbolically irreversible. You sit quietly as the preparations unfold. A red candle is lit tall and solemn, its flame fluttering like it too is unsure about this arrangement. An older woman, perhaps Yulan's aunt, brings in a tray of ceremonial dishes, tea, red dates, sticky rice cakes. Each one is placed before a paper effigy of the groom who sits propped up like a cardboard husband at a party no one's sure they want to attend. It's unsettling, but it's also strangely moving. Yulan rises. She bows before the table. Then, with trembling fingers, she pours the tea half into one cup, half into another. The ritual is called Hei Chai Unity Tea. Even in a one-sided marriage, the tea must be shared. Now the family makes its intent clear. By marrying Yulan to their deceased son, they have not only preserved his honor, but also secured her place within their household. She is now their daughter-in-law. Not figuratively, literally. She will live here, tend to their home, and in some cases vow to remain chaste for life. You try not to react. It feels impossible by modern standards, but this was the logic of lineage. A woman even living could be bound into a family through death. Some historians argue that these marriages were more transactional than spiritual. A childless groom meant no heir, no continuation of ancestral worship. By marrying him posthumously, a woman could adopt a child later symbolically through the groom and preserve the family name. Others believed that some women accepted this fate out of loyalty or deep grief. The most romantic version, that love simply didn't die when he did. There's a fringe tale from Jiangsu province about a young woman who insisted on marrying her fiancé after he died from smallpox. The family agreed, believing it would ease her sorrow. She never remarried. Each year she held a private tea ceremony for him on their anniversary. He visits, she once whispered to a neighbor, when the wind smells like rain. Of course, not all living brides entered ghost marriages willingly. Some were pressured, manipulated, or simply offered no other option. You hear hushed talk of one girl who tried to run on the morning of her spirit wedding, only to be brought back by relatives who believed her refusal would bring ruin to the family. That wedding ended quietly, but with heavy eyes around the fire. Yulan, though, seems calm. Maybe she believes. Maybe she doesn't. But she carries herself with grace as the ceremony moves on. There are bows to the paper groom incense offerings, and finally a walk slow and deliberate around the ancestral shrine. It's called the Ghost Bridal Circuit, a final symbolic joining. The moment that stays with you, however, is after the ceremony. As everyone files out, you see Yulan pick up the paper effigy. She holds it gently, like you might hold a memory. And then she smiles, small, faint, but unmistakably real. You ask a woman nearby what happens to her now. She stays, the woman replies. She is the family's daughter now, she will care for them. And one day when she dies, she will join her husband. But she never met him, you say. The woman shrugs, she will. And somehow that answer makes sense here. Later that evening, you sit near the courtyard as the family prepares dinner. Yulan helps serve food, her red sleeves tucked at the elbows. No one speaks of the ceremony. No one mentions the paper groom. But when the wind passes through the house, rattling the lanterns and tugging at the veil still hanging by the door, you swear for a split second you see two shadows in the candlelight, instead of one. You wake up to the scent of pine ash and the distant clatter of wooden sandals on stone. The sky is overcast, the kind of soft grey that feels made for stories, for secrets. Today the villagers are talking. They always do after a ghost wedding. You sit down on a worn bench outside a tea house where three elders are already deep in conversation, sipping from tiny cups and debating something with exaggerated hand gestures. They glance at you, and one of them leans over with a grin. So did you see the bride last night, or just feel her? That earns a wheezing laugh from the others. But beneath the teasing is a real question, one that's hung in the air ever since the first paper bride was lit on fire. Do people truly believe in this? Or are ghost marriages just elaborate performances for the sake of tradition, appearances, or uneasy dreams? You sip your tea, still warm and vaguely smoky, and lean in to listen. There's no straight answer. Historians today still argue whether the people who practiced ghost marriage in Qing Dynasty China truly believed they were marrying spirits, or whether they were simply fulfilling social duties wrapped in ritual. Some say it was deeply felt. They point to detailed funeral accounts, ancestral shrines, meticulously maintained by ghost daughters-in-law, and family letters discussing dreams in which the deceased bride appeared smiling after her wedding. Others believe the practice was more pragmatic, part theatre, part tradition, part clever workaround for tricky inheritance issues or unmarried sons. One fringe theory suggests that ghost marriages offered communities a safe way to process grief. By giving form and ceremony to death, the living could remain in control. It's easier to mourn when you have steps to follow, costumes to wear, paper to burn. You glance around the tea house. A man is telling a story about his great-aunt who married a dead man and claimed he whispered jokes to her when the oil lamps flickered. She always laughed in her sleep, he says fondly. She said the afterlife had better punchlines.
Another woman chimes in, eyes twinkling. Well, my cousin was married off to a ghost and then had the best harvest she'd ever seen. Tell me that's not a sign.
And so it goes, belief, doubt, jokes and half-truths swirled together like steam from your teacup. You begin to see that ghost marriages weren't always about ghosts. Sometimes they were about preserving dignity. A family whose daughter died young could still say she was married, she was honored. A childless son could still have a daughter-in-law to keep incense burning at his altar. Appearances mattered, but not in a cynical way. In a cultural sense, they were the glue holding fragile legacies together. Then again, some took it a little too far. One man tells of an enterprising matchmaker in Guangdong who was known for marrying the same paper bride to multiple deceased grooms, reusing her with slight costume changes. She was very popular, he chuckles. Good cheekbones. The others groan, but you can tell it's a familiar tale. A small reminder that for every sincere ceremony, there was a little human mischief. And performance was always part of the appeal. Ghost marriages had stages, scripts, and roles to play. The medium chants, the matchmaker negotiates, the family acts with solemnity, and even the ghosts, if they exist, are expected to appear in dreams or make symbolic gestures. One candle flickers, a nod from the groom. A dish shatters, the bride's having second thoughts. You realize that belief isn't binary, it's layered. A family might say we don't believe in ghosts and yet still offer a paper comb to a paper bride just in case. That paradox in its sleepy logic fits perfectly in this world of folded traditions and fiery farewells. And in Qing Dynasty China, where ancestor reverence was a daily practice, belief didn't have to be dramatic. It was woven into habits, burning joss paper, bowing at shrines, leaving oranges on an altar. Ghost marriage was simply one more thread in the tapestry. Back in the village square, a few children play with scraps of red paper, pretending to host their own spirit weddings. One folds a rough little effigy, wraps it in cloth and declares, "You may kiss the bride." Then they all erupt in laughter. Performance belief, who's to say? You walk away from the tea house as the clouds begin to thin, revealing a pale patch of sky. Someone's burning incense in a distant doorway. A rooster makes a noise like it too has questions about all this. You remember something an elder said as you left the table. Whether they come or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we remember they could. It's past midnight now and the village is wrapped in stillness, except for the sound of someone chewing loudly 2 courtyards away. Don't mind him, someone whispers as you slip past a moonlit veranda. The dead make him hungry. You've been invited to spend the night at the home of a family with an unusual claim. Their ghost daughter-in-law visits regularly and eats. She likes the pickled mustard greens, the grandmother says matter-of-factly as she ladles out soup. But we only leave out 2 dumplings, otherwise she gets spoiled. You nod politely, unsure whether to laugh, lean in, or quietly leave. But the dumplings are already steaming, placed reverently at the family altar. Beside them, a small cup of tea, a sprig of plum blossom, and a paper comb for good measure. Welcome to the world of haunted in-laws. One lesser-known aspect of ghost marriages is the post-wedding relationship. In many cases, the spirit bride or groom didn't just vanish into metaphor, they lingered, they made appearances, sometimes benign, sometimes opinionated. Families reported dreams in which the deceased offered suggestions for household repairs, asked for incense, or reminded relatives to finish the laundry. In some regions, it was considered proper to leave out symbolic food for ghost spouses during festivals. In others, the visits became routine, especially if the spirit bride had been particularly young or had no living children to remember her. One elderly uncle tells you about his cousin's spirit wife, who, according to family law, once turned the soy sauce sour when her photo was moved from the family altar. She didn't like being in the corner, he mutters. Wanted to face the front gate. You blink slowly, and you moved it.
Of course, he says, as if that were the most obvious answer in the world. What are we, monsters?
Historians still puzzle over how seriously people took these accounts. Some argue they were coping mechanisms, dreams filtered through grief, guilt, or cultural suggestion. Others point to the consistency of certain behaviors across villages. The food left out the small gestures of deference, the dreams that felt just a little too vivid. One fringe theory even suggests that the ghost in-laws served a disciplinary role. If a daughter-in-law slacked on housework, a sudden bad dream, or a mysteriously extinguished lamp might be blamed on the displeasure of her spectral predecessor. Ghosts in this context became convenient enforcers of tradition. You're told of one bride who insisted her husband's ghost wife was still watching. She reportedly left offerings at the spirit's altar every week and asked for her permission before redecorating the kitchen.
It's not superstition, she insisted, it's manners.
That phrase echoes in your mind as you tour another ancestral hall the next morning. Rows of tablets line the walls, each with names carved in gold and dates neatly listed. But one tablet catches your eye. It's newer, smaller, with the inscription, "Married by Fire." Remembered by name. Beside it sits a tray of withered jujubes and a folded red cloth. No one speaks of the tablet directly, but when a boy runs past and jostles it slightly, his mother hisses, "Apologize." He bows low. The tablet does not respond, but you sense everyone feels better. And what about jealousy? You ask one aunt. What if the ghost bride doesn't like the living one? She scoffs. Then they work it out. Women always do. Still, there are stories. Stories of living wives hearing footsteps when alone, or of dreams where the dead bride scolds them for wearing her hairpin. One tale tells of a bride who wore the red veil of her husband's first ghost wife and woke up with scratches on her back. Another family placed both effigies, ghost wife and living wife, on the same altar during a New Year's ceremony. The next day, the firewood pile had been knocked over. Coincidence or a poltergeist with opinions? In some regions, people held special ceremonies to formally introduce the living and ghost wives. These events, half wedding, half peacemaking summit, often involved offerings incense and a lot of muttered prayers for mutual respect. You imagine a spiritual version of speed dating. This is Lynn. She makes excellent dumplings and only plans to be here for 50 or 60 more years. By now, you've noticed that people don't fear the ghost in-laws. They respect them. They accommodate them. Occasionally, they bribe them with sweets. You see one last ritual before leaving the house, a woman lighting incense while holding a strand of red thread. She waves it gently, murmuring something you can't catch. The thread is tied to a doorway, meant to let the ghost bride know she's welcome without scaring off actual guests.
A balancing act, really.
As you step into the morning light, you hear the family calling you back for one last dumpling. You hesitate. She won't mind, the grandmother smiles. We made extra. You eat it slowly, chewing as quietly as you can, just in case. Morning has barely begun to stretch across the tiled rooftops, and already someone is arguing at the magistrate's gate. You shuffle over because of course you do, and find two men red in the face waving what looks like marriage paperwork. You squint. Yes, it's a ghost marriage contract, and apparently things have gotten complicated. As it turns out, not everyone in Qing Dynasty China loved the idea of ghost marriages. While culturally accepted in many regions, they existed in a peculiar legal twilight. Spirit marriages weren't officially recognized by the state, but they weren't always forbidden either. Instead, they existed in that deliciously grey space where custom and law awkwardly shake hands and pretend they're not related. This morning's dispute, for instance, involves a bride's family accusing the groom's side of failing to fulfill ceremonial obligations, meaning they cheaped out on the dowry and skipped the rooster walk. Scandalous. The magistrate listens with a face carved from boredom. What's fascinating is that despite being technically unofficial, ghost marriages often drag their issues straight into courtrooms. There are real Qing-era legal documents outlining inheritance disputes, dowry disagreements, and even the occasional ghost marriage fraud. No, really. In one case, a family attempted to claim land inheritance for their son by marrying him after his death to a paper bride, then using the union to adopt a nephew and name him heir. The magistrate was not impressed. He ruled that paper brides could not produce heirs no matter how elaborate the ceremony. So yes, sometimes the state stepped in to say, nice ritual. But no, you can't pass on the family fortune to someone you married off to ashes. Still, enforcement was inconsistent. In remote villages, ghost marriages were treated as valid family arrangements. In more urban or bureaucratically scrutinized areas, they were often ignored or gently discouraged. One fringe story claims that a local governor in Hunan province once tried to ban ghost marriages outright, only to be met with a mysterious series of broken furniture incidents in his manor. The bride is unhappy, one monk warned. The governor rescinded the ban. Coincidence, historians argue. You sip your morning tea and decide to believe it anyway. Back in the village square, the crowd around the magistrate's gate has dispersed. The men have been told to settle their dispute through temple mediation, which sounds suspiciously like, go away and let the ancestors sort it out. You wonder how common that was, using religious figures to handle what civil courts didn't want to touch. Turns out very common. Taoist priests, Buddhist monks and community elders often acted as unofficial arbitrators in ghost marriage cases. Their role, to keep the peace and possibly to avoid being haunted. In fact, some families wrote up double contracts, one for the ceremony used during the burning rituals, and one for the practicalities like who inherits what, who gets to keep the paper trousseau, and whether the groom's shrine gets upgraded with new red trim. You walk past a row of ancestral tablets in one home, where two nearly identical names sit side by side. One is etched deeper with official recognition, the other is fainter, barely visible. That's the ghost wife, says the daughter of the house. We weren't allowed to register her with the clan, so we did it here instead. You ask if that bothers her. She shrugs. My grandmother sees her. That's enough. That answer echoes what you've started to realize: legality for the people here isn't just about paper or state recognition. It's about spiritual coherence. It's about completing a circle even if no court will stamp it. Still, tensions happened. There's a famous 1890s case of a ghost marriage gone wildly wrong. Two families accusing each other of faking ancestral records to make their deceased children match. One family had even changed a date of birth on the ghost's tablet. You read that sentence twice, falsifying ghost documents. The Qing Dynasty never disappoints. And while it may sound absurd, the consequences weren't. Entire family reputations could be affected. A botched or disputed ghost marriage could lead to social isolation, temple expulsion, or ancestral displeasure, none of which anyone wanted on their spiritual resume. One elder sums it up as you pass by his courtyard. A living divorce is embarrassing. A ghost divorce is terrifying. You walk a little faster after that. By the time you reach the edge of town, the morning mist has started to lift. Farmers are already in their fields, red thread charms tied around their wrists for luck. A boy runs past with a paper fan, pretending to be a magistrate. No more ghost wives, he shouts, before collapsing into giggles. You smile. There's something both solemn and ridiculous about it all, like most human traditions. You turn a corner and spot a small signboard in front of a village temple. It reads, "Weddings of Harmony, living and otherwise. Inquire before sunset." You're tempted, but instead you just take a photo, well, a mental one. It's a snapshot of a world where law, love and legacy aren't separated by life and death, but connected by belief, ceremony, and sometimes a rooster. It's past midnight again, because naturally that's when the really weird stuff happens. You've followed a man named Old Zhang out of the village and into the woods along a dirt path so narrow that even the moonlight seems to hesitate. He's carrying a bundle wrapped in red cloth, and he's wearing straw sandals that are far too loud for someone trying to be discreet. This is how they used to do it, he says, not looking back. The body runners, the night diggers, the ghost thieves. You stop, you check your pockets, you slightly regret your life choices. But old Zhang just chuckles. We're not stealing anyone tonight, I'm just showing you where they used to wait. Here in the shadows of Qing Dynasty society lies one of its darker secrets, the underground trade in corpses for ghost marriages. As the demand for posthumous brides grew, especially in regions with high male mortality, an entire black market economy emerged. Corpses, especially those of young unmarried women, were in high demand. And where there's demand, there's always someone ready to supply it. You arrive at a low, ruined pavilion. They waited here, old Zhang says softly. The runners. They watched the road for new burials. It turns out that some marriages weren't exactly consensual. Freshly buried bodies were exhumed, cleaned, dressed, and sold, usually to families desperate to find a bride for a deceased son. These women, often from poorer families or without living relatives, to protect their remains, were used as silent, unwilling participants in ritual marriages. You feel a chill, and not just from the wind. There's a fringe tale of a runner who became so haunted by the spirits of the women he sold that he stopped speaking entirely. When asked why he no longer took jobs, he reportedly whispered, "They don't want to come." Sometimes the body wasn't stolen at all. Some grieving families, knowing their daughter was unmarriageable in life, would offer her body posthumously in exchange for money or social status. The arrangement was silent, shameful, and often disguised as charity. In one recorded incident from late Qing times, a coffin was reported missing from a village in Shanxi province. 3 days later, it turned up newly dressed, adorned in red silk, and already buried in another family's ancestral plot. When questioned, the new family claimed they had heard the spirit was seeking a match. Historians debate how widespread this practice really was. Some see it as rare and exaggerated in later folklore. Others argue that it was more common in areas where poverty and patriarchal pressure intersected, creating a cruel market for posthumous brides. Whatever the case, the trade in corpses eventually became serious enough to warrant local edicts. Some magistrates explicitly banned exhumation for ghost marriages. Others turned a blind eye, especially when elite families were involved.
Can't jail someone for marrying a ghost, old Zhang mutters, kicking a stone.
You imagine the horror of a family losing a daughter twice, once to death, and again to the silence that follows a secret sale. And yet even here there's complexity. Some villages tried to regulate the practice, establishing rituals to cleanse stolen bodies or appease their spirits. The paper bride might be offered additional dowries, extra incense, or even a temple donation in her name. Whether this was belief or guilt is still an open question. There's even one recorded instance of a young woman's body being stolen, married to a dead groom, and then years later disinterred again and moved when the groom's family lost their land. She was reburied with him in a new village, a ghost marriage, followed by a ghost divorce, and then a ghost relocation. You can't decide whether to be horrified or just deeply confused. Old Zhang shows you a small shrine near a broken stone bridge. This is for the ones who weren't found, he says. We leave candles here just in case they're still wandering. Someone's left jujubes and folded lotus flowers. You light a stick of incense and place it beside the others, not for anyone in particular, just for the idea of someone. As you walk back, you ask old Zhang if people still do this. He shakes his head. Not anymore. Now they just burn paper brides. Much simpler, less digging. But he glances over his shoulder anyway.
Still, he adds, I wouldn't sleep near an unmarked grave.
You nod slowly. Message received. You're back in the village now, but something's shifted. The paper effigies are fewer. The joss paper stalls are closed. Even Madame Liu, the matchmaker, has moved indoors for the season. The ghost marriages haven't disappeared exactly, but they've faded like old ink left too long in the sun. It's the early 20th century now. The Qing Dynasty is gone, swept aside by revolution's warlords and a new appetite for progress. You hear it in the way people talk. We don't do that anymore, says a boy, balancing a chicken on his head. We have electricity. But some villages do still do that. Ghost marriages, once public affairs with musicians and matchmakers, have gone underground, quieter, subtler, and occasionally modernized. You sit beside a radio in a town that barely had telegrams a decade ago. A man flips through a photo album, not of weddings, but of ghost weddings. The most recent was last year. They met in a dream, he says, showing you a picture of a small altar, a burned paper bride, and, oddly, a SIM card taped to a red envelope. He didn't have anyone else. She showed up in the night and told us her name. You try not to blink too hard. Even in the face of railroads and communiques, the urge to complete unfinished stories persists. Families who'd never dare hold a public ghost wedding still whisper to monks commission paper brides or light incense on specific days. It's a ritual now wrapped in privacy and sometimes shame, but it's there. One fringe article you stumble across in a tea house describes a 1930s ceremony where the effigies were mailed between provinces, the ritual held over telegram, and the burning done by proxy. The ghost marriage had gone long distance. Still, things are changing. Education spreads. Superstition becomes a dirty word. The state takes more interest in death not for ritual, but for census and order. Temple lands are confiscated, shrines are destroyed, the old priests disappear, and the dream channels begin to close. Yet not entirely. You speak to a young woman in her 20s. She's studying accounting, listens to Taiwanese pop music, and rolls her eyes at the mention of ghost marriages. So backward, she mutters. My grandmother still believes, but not me. You nod. But then she adds, so softly, it might as well be to herself. Still, when I was little, I dreamed of a red-robed girl sitting at the foot of my bed. She smiled. She had no eyes. You both sip your tea in silence after that. Historians note that even as public ghost marriages declined, the symbolism didn't vanish. Families continued to commemorate the dead with tokens, red string offerings, folded paper gifts, even small engagement boxes placed at graves. One 1950s journal recounts a rural family that buried a paper bride with their son privately at night with no music, no procession, no matchmaker, just a whisper of tradition. And in some cases, the practice adapted. Spirit marriages were framed as ancestral rites or repackaged as local festivals. Some villages even passed off ghost weddings as plays, public performances with actors and music. But you knew. The audience knew. It was a marriage, just with different lighting. In recent years, especially in parts of northern China and Taiwan, there's been a quiet revival. Newspapers carry the occasional odd headline, "Family marries daughter's spirit to commemorate 10-year anniversary." Paper husband burned with smartphone, said to be modern man. You watch a video on someone's phone. It's shaky but unmistakable, a ghost wedding in full swing. Red lanterns, paper figures, a Taoist priest live streaming the chant. Welcome to the 21st century afterlife. There's even a kind of Tinder for ghost marriages now, listings shared discreetly between funeral homes and medium networks. Unmarried girl, died at 23, quiet, obedient, loves poetry. Some families still seek peace. Others seek ritual completion. A few seek money. You ask an old monk if it bothers him that the practice persists. He shrugs. The dead don't care about headlines. And yet even he admits it's rarer now. Fewer people believe. Fewer people remember the steps of the ritual or why certain offerings matter. The craft of effigy making has become tourist entertainment, and the red thread mostly used now in wedding decorations at cafes. Still, the ashes of memory burn slow. Before you leave, someone hands you a folded bundle wrapped in faded silk. Inside is a small paper hairpin, a tiny comb, and a note written in shaky brushstroke for the one who waits. No one tells you who left it, but you take it with you just in case. The sky is a colorless blue as you find yourself in one last village, the kind that only appears on maps if you know exactly where to look. It's quiet here. Even the birds seem to speak in whispers. But something stirs in the air, the rustle of paper, the faint scent of old incense, the feeling that something is waiting. Today you've been invited to a wedding again. But this one is different. It's not a reenactment, it's not a superstition or a ceremony disguised as a cultural show. It's quiet, solemn, and full of presence. The paper bride sits beneath a red parasol in the corner of the courtyard, her form impossibly still. Her face is carefully painted, modest eyes, a hint of blush, and lips just curved enough to suggest kindness. Her hair is bound in the traditional Yunji style, and someone has added a small necklace with tiny jade beads. No one talks loudly near her. No one dares. It's said that this spirit bride died at 17 before she could marry. Her parents, now very old, never recovered from the loss. They lived with a blank space where ceremony was supposed to be. So now, at long last, they are giving her what she missed. You don't ask why they waited so long. You already know the answer. It never stopped mattering. Her groom is also paper constructed with the same tenderness, calloused hands, shaped from crimped parchment, a gentle, bowing head. They sit side by side, not touching, but with matching red sashes tied loosely across their chests. This is the kind of wedding no one brags about. No musicians, no parade, no rooster. Just a soft breeze, a few bowls of steamed buns, and a bundle of offerings waiting to be burned. The parents perform the ceremony themselves, slowly, gently, with the clumsiness of age and the precision of deep memory. The mother ties a red thread between the two effigies. The father lights the first incense stick. Neither weeps, but their eyes shine with that sharp wetness that memory always carries. There's a fringe tradition here, one rarely mentioned outside the village before a paper bride is burned. Someone whispers a name into her ear. Just once. Not a command, not a prayer. Just a name. Something to tether her as she crosses. Something to remind her of herself. You watch as the father leans close to the bride and whispers, "You can't hear what he says." And then the flame begins. The fire is gentle this time. No dramatic whoosh, no tower of sparks. The effigies burn quietly, folding into themselves like dancers at rest. The red parasol collapses slowly, almost as if bowing. There's something beautiful in the way the smoke curls up with unhurried light and strangely certain. It doesn't need to rush. It knows where it's going. People place their offerings carefully, a folded silk fan, a miniature book of poems, a pair of embroidered slippers no bigger than a teacup lid. Each item added with care, each flame a kind of release. You think about everything you've seen, the matchmaking, the contracts, the mediums swaying beside their bowls of rice, the dowries folded and set alight, the mothers smoothing down the sleeves of daughters made of paper. And in all of it, the same quiet purpose: to remember, to repair, to release. As the last of the ash settles, the family bows. No one claps, no one calls for celebration. But there's peace here, dense and gentle like snowfall without snow. You linger after everyone leaves. One of the monks comes by to tidy the brazier. He nods to you. "They're together now," he says simply. She smiled. You don't ask how he knows. You just believe it. And now, with the flames gone and the courtyard empty, we let ourselves drift. You sit beneath a flowering tree, its blossoms silent, its branches unmoving. There's no ceremony left to see, no paper bride to honor, no whispered names waiting at the edge of the fire.
Only the hush of old stories settling around you like soft silk.
Let your breath slow now. There's no need to remember every detail, the painted eyes, the red string, the shadows that stepped quietly into place. Just let them blur like smoke rising into morning light. Let them soften. Let them fade. Think of paper folding into figures of incense curling in slow spirals of names spoken with tenderness across centuries. Think of red robes and dream weddings of tea shared with someone who's no longer here but never fully gone. Feel the ground beneath you steady and still. The world has held 1,000 ghost weddings before tonight, and it will hold 1,000 more. But in this moment you are at the very end of the aisle. Not to be wed, but to rest. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Imagine the quiet laughter of paper brides and grooms rustling gently as they disappear into the wind. There's no need to say goodbye.
Only good night.